We've been in the end times for 76 years, and we've been seeing end time signs for 76 years. But let me say this. There's a massive difference between 1948 and 2024. And I'll talk about that through this message. And so why do I believe that we're living in the very end times? And I want to document this in this message. Let me give you 7 reasons why I believe we're living at the very end of the end times. And so the first is the end of a generation. Jesus in Matthew 24, he was asked by the disciples, when is the end going to come? And so in Matthew 24, Jesus starts giving all the signs of the end times, the things that we're seeing happening right now. And he said this, learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you see all these things, know that it is near at the doors. Assuredly, I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away until all these things take place. He said, he's talking about the end times. When you see all these things begin to happen, look up and lift up your head. And he says that there's going to be one generation. The generation that sees these things will see all things take place. In other words, the generation that sees the beginning of the end will see the end of the end. And there are some people that argue and they say, well, no, Jesus was just talking about the tribulation or this and that. But there's another text that says exactly the same thing. This is Joel chapter 2, beginning with chapter 2. It says, the sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord. And it shall come to pass that whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there shall be deliverance, as the Lord has said. Now listen to this. For behold, in those days and at that time, when I bring back the captives of Judah and Jerusalem, I will also gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and I will enter into judgment with them there on account of my people, my heritage Israel, whom they've scattered among the nations. They have also divided up my land. And this is God speaking in the first person. And he says there, the sun will be darkened, the moon will be turned to blood before the great and awesome day of the Lord. Well, see, we didn't know what that meant for many years, but Mark Biltz, a pastor from Washington, discovered he was looking at the lunar eclipses and solar eclipses. NASA has a record of those hundreds of years back and hundreds of years forward. And what he found out was that when Israel became a nation in 1948, in 1949 and 1950, there were 4 lunar eclipses called blood moons on religious holy days in 1949 and 1950 when they were setting up their government. In 1967, Israel won the Six-Day War and got back all of the city of Jerusalem. In 1967 and 1968, there were 4 more blood moons on religious holy days in 1967 and 1968. Then in 2014 and 15, it happened again also with solar eclipses on religious holy days. And so what God is saying here is, as signs, Jesus said there'd be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. There have been signs since 1949 in the sun, moon, and stars, many others than the ones I'm talking about right here. And God says, in those days and at that same time, when I bring back the captives of Judah and Jerusalem, that's 1948, I'm going to enter into judgment with the nations in the valley of Jehoshaphat. That's Armageddon. The valley of Jehoshaphat, Jehoshaphat means Jehovah has judged. That's the valley between the Temple Mount and the Mount of Olives. That's where Jesus is going to return. And God says, in the same time, in the same period of time, when I bring back the captives of Judah and Jerusalem, 1948, Armageddon is going to happen in that same period of time, in that generation. And so we have been seeing the land of Israel divided, the people of Israel persecuted, exactly what God says here. I'm going to enter into judgment with the nations on account of my heritage, my people Israel, whom you've scattered among the nations, and you've divided up my land. And notice there that God calls it his land. And so God is angry. And he's saying, I'm going to come back. I'm going to enter into judgment with the nations that have mistreated the Jews and divided up the land of Israel in the same period of time. When I do this, I'm going to do this. And so you say, well, how long is a generation? Okay, well, that's a good question, because the Bible says in Psalm 90, the days of our lives are 70 years, or if by reason of strength, they're 80 years. And so 70 to 80 years. Well, the average lifespan right now in America is 76 years. Now, some people would say, no, it's 120 years, because in Genesis 6, God says the days of a man's life are 120 years. That's not what God said. In Genesis chapter 6 is where it's talking about the Nephilim. And God was going to judge the world because of the wickedness in the world. And he said, I'm not going to strive with man forever. The days of their lives will be 120 years. He was talking about Noah's generation. He was saying, you have 120 years to repent, or I'm going to flood the earth. So the only specific reference we have to a generation in the Bible is Psalm chapter 90. We have 3.5 years to go until Israel turns 80. We have 3.5, and I'm not setting dates. This is not about math. This is about the severity of the signs that we're seeing right now. And I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to comfort you. What I'm trying to say is Jesus will come very soon. Because of the severity, Jesus said in Matthew 24, it's like birth pains. And any woman who's had a child knows they don't get better and they get closer together. And what we have been seeing since 1948, 1968, 2000, 2010, 2020, we have been seeing now the intensification of the birth pains to the point now, October 7th happened a year ago, and now we're seeing Israel about to bomb Iran, which could start World War III, a world situation. This is a very, very tense period of time in the world, just like Jesus said. And so we're at the end of a generation. You know, and Jesus said it in Matthew 24. Joel says it in Joel 2 and 3. And so we'll see what happens. And I don't set dates, but I'm just telling you, we're at the end of a generation. The second sign, the reason I believe that we're at the very end, is the sign of vexation. Now, this is 2 Peter 2, and it says, if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly, and turned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them with an overthrow, making them an example to those who should live after the ungodly, and delivered just Lot, vexed with the filthy conversation of the wicked, for that righteous man dwelling among them and seeing and hearing, vexed his righteous soul from day to day with their unlawful deeds. Well, the word vex means to subject to severe distress, torture, or to harass. In other words, it just means your heart breaks by the ungodliness that you're seeing around you. Have you felt like that you were just sickened by the things that you're seeing, or that your soul was vexed? Well, let me give you a little test here, and I'll show you what vexation means. I'm going to say one sentence, and you're going to feel vexation. The opening ceremony at the Summer Olympics in France, where a bunch of drag queens mocked Christ, mocked communion, and became role models for the entire world, men, women, and children. It's the most shocking thing. Can you imagine? If that would have happened 40 years ago, they would not have gotten out of Paris alive. Or 30 years ago. We're now living in the world of the Antichrist, where you see this ungodliness. And of course, Lot lived in Sodom and Gomorrah, where they had all of the perversion, sexual perversion there. And so the anti-Israel demonstrations all over America at college campuses and all over the world, the filth coming out of Hollywood, the hate all over the world, social media, all those kinds of things, the woke movement, and all of the desire to kill children in their mother's womb, and if somehow they survive, to mutilate them. And you're seeing this ungodly, and they're brazen about it. They're proud of it. And you see this constant filth, constant ungodliness, and the desire to destroy anything that resembles the Word of God or biblical morality. And so there's a vexation that happens within our soul. And one of the things I've heard people say, many believers, and I know many of you watching right now, it's just you're thinking, how long do we have to put up with this? Well, I don't think much longer, honestly. I mean, it hurts your heart to see what's happening, and that's what happened with Lot, righteous Lot. His soul was vexed. But do you realize in 1948, your soul wouldn't have been vexed? I was born in 1953, and I'm just telling you, it was a totally different world. I grew up in a school. Every school I went to growing up, we prayed in the name of Jesus over the loudspeaker every single day. The 10 Commandments were on the walls of the school, every school that I attended. Television was squeaky clean. They couldn't show people with their pajamas on unless the top button was buttoned. They couldn't show people in bed. They couldn't show a bathroom. It was squeaky clean and moral. And then you saw the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. But it's only been really in the last 10 to 20 years since the invention of the internet that we have seen the moral freefall in the world, not just in America, but in the world. And so this is a major sign of the end times, is the vexation of our souls. And the good news I have for you is this: Jesus is coming. We're going to go to the marriage supper of the Lamb, and then we're going to return with Jesus in the second coming, and we're going to rule and reign with him for 1,000 years. There'll be no more corruption. There'll be no more elections. There'll be a righteous king ruling the earth for 1,000 years, and we will rule and reign with him in our perfect bodies. We will not have a sin nature, and we will no longer be vexed. We will be in this perfect world of the millennium, and then we will go into eternity after that. And so, but vexation, many people today are just saying, Jimmy, I don't know how much longer I can take this. Hang on. That's what happened a lot, and it's a major end time sign. Here's a number 3 reason that I believe we're living at the end, very end, and that is the possible 10th red heifer and the preparation of the third temple. Now, this is why October 7th happened last year. According to Abu Obaida, who is a spokesman for Hamas, this was the pretext for the invasion on October 7th, so stay with me. And so on Numbers 19, it says, the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, this is the ordinance of the law, which the Lord has commanded, saying, speak to the children of Israel that they may bring you a red heifer without blemish, in which there is no defect, on which a yoke has never come. And this is Numbers 19:9. Then a man who is clean shall gather up the ashes of the heifer and store them outside the camp in a clean place, and they shall be kept for the congregation of the children of Israel for the water of purification. It is for purification of sin. Now, Israel has to rebuild the temple because the Antichrist goes into a rebuilt temple in Israel on the Temple Mount. This is 2 Thessalonians 2. It says the Antichrist sits in the temple of God, declaring that he is God. So there has to be a rebuilt temple, but they're impure. The Jews are impure. It's been 2,000 years since they had a red heifer. And by the way, the red heifer is a type of Christ. It was slaughtered outside the camp. It was red, and its ashes are for purification. And so they now have 5 red heifers that were flown 2 years ago from Dallas to Israel. 3 of those have been disqualified. This red heifer that has to be completely clean. It can't have any white hairs on it. It can't have ever had a yoke on it. In fact, these heifers are miraculous because of COVID. They did not have their ears pierced because most of the cows have their ears pierced and tagged. They didn't. And so they have 2 today that qualified. They're of age, and they're ready to be sacrificed. And so the Temple Institute in Jerusalem is ready to rebuild the temple. They have every single thing they need. They have the trained priests to minister in the temple, all from the bloodline of Aaron. They have all the priestly garments, musical instruments, and instruments for sacrifice and worship. They have the menorah of solid gold in the Jewish quarter in Jerusalem, and that will go in the rebuilt temple. They have the cornerstone ready for the temple, and they have the Levitical choir trained and ready. I was in the Temple Institute 2 years ago, and I took the tour through there, and I saw everything I'm describing to you right now, and they said these are not replicas. These are kosher. This is actually what will go in the new temple. But when we got to the end of the tour, we walked into a room, and they opened these drapes, and there was a replica of the Ark of the Covenant. And they said, this is an exact replica of the Ark of the Covenant. They said, we know where the real one is, and when the time comes, we'll go get it. And they say that on their webpage, the Temple Institute. And so they're ready to rebuild. But for them to rebuild, they have to sacrifice the red heifer. And the problem is that, the Arabs know about this. Let me say one thing. According to the Mishnah, which is the record of the oral tradition of the Jews, there have been 9 red heifers since the time of Moses. This is what the Jews believe. The 10th red heifer will usher in the reign of the Messiah. They have 2 red heifers in Israel right now that qualify, and they're of age. You say, well, why don't they sacrifice them? Well, here's the problem they have. This is a quote from Abu Obaida, and this was after the October 7th attack. He said, the aggression reached its peak against Al-Aqsa with the arrival of the red cows as the implementation of a detestable religious myth intended to aggress the sentiments of an entire nation. And so they're using that as a pretext. And they're saying, you brought these red cows over here. You're ready to invade the Temple Mount. And so this is why we invaded you. Well, to sacrifice these red heifers, it has to be on a piece of property that's visible from the Temple Mount, that's adjacent to the Temple Mount. Well, they have 2 pieces of property. They've already practiced it. They're completely ready. But these areas where they have this land are in heavily Arab neighborhoods. And if the Arabs see them go up there, if the Muslims, those people see them go up there and sacrifice these red heifers, I mean, it's going to be, all heaven's going to break loose. And so be praying for them, by the way. They're ready. They're ready right now. Can you imagine, for the first time in 2,000 years, we have a red heifer that qualifies, that they're ready to sacrifice right now. The only problem is the political situation in the Middle East. And they're very clever people. Maybe they'll find a way to do it. But this is possibly the 10th red heifer since the time of Moses. And what I'm saying is, we're not at the end times, we're at the very end of the end times. This would allow them to cleanse the Temple Mount when the time comes, and the priest, and be able to rebuild their temple. Here's number 4. These are signs of the very end times. And so it's a technological explosion in AI. And so Daniel wrote the book of Daniel, a very prophetic book. And at the end of the book of Daniel, the 12th chapter is the last chapter, It says, you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. In 1948, the technology didn't exist for the end to come. Let me just give you a couple of examples here. In Revelation 11, it says, it's talking about the two witnesses here. When they have finished their testimony, the beast that comes up from the abyss will wage war against them and conquer them and kill them. Their corpses will lie in the main street of the great city, which has the symbolic name Sodom and Egypt, where indeed their Lord was crucified. Those from every tribe, people, tribe, tongue, and nation will gaze on their corpses for 3.5 days and not allow their corpses to be buried. The inhabitants of the earth will gloat over them and be glad. John wrote that 1900 years ago, and what he said was the entire earth will gloat over them. A 3.5-day event. Well, it would take months, 1900 years ago, to get a message around the world. This is a 3.5-day event. Did you know that in 1948, well, my dad sold televisions. We didn't have TVs. It was just now coming out. 1958, 68, 78, 88, we didn't have the internet or computers. Did you know today that 6.92 billion people in the world have smartphones? Not cell phones, smartphones. For the first time in human history, the entire world can watch the same thing at the same time on their smartphones, and the entire earth can gloat over the two witnesses when they're killed. That's what I'm saying. We couldn't have done that until now, until about the last 10 or 15 years. Smartphones didn't come out until 2007. Another issue here is the Antichrist. He has to have centralized control over the economies of the world, because in the middle of the tribulation, he imposes the mark of the beast. Actually, it's the false prophet who imposes the mark of the beast, and you can't buy or sell without that mark. And so there has to be some type of central financial control for that to happen, and that requires a cashless economy. This is Capital One Shopping Research. An estimated 69% of Americans used cash for few, if any, purchases over the last 12 months, and this is a current report. In a year, the share of cashless American consumers grows 13%. So every year, 13% more Americans don't use cash. 63.9% of Americans expect a cashless future, and globally, point-of-sale transactions are 85% cashless in 2024. Trends indicate that 90% of point-of-sale transactions will be cashless by 2028. And remember now, this only has to happen by the middle of the tribulation. And what I'm saying is that technologically, we are at a place where things in the Bible can happen that could have never have happened before. And I'm going to talk about AI for just a minute. It says here, the coming of the lawless one, this is the Antichrist, is according to the working of Satan, with all power signs and lying wonders, and with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth that they might be saved. And the word power there means supernatural power. Do you realize that artificial intelligence is supernatural? And that the greatest fear, that there was a man this week that won the Nobel Prize. His name is Jeffrey Hinton from the University of Toronto. Did you realize he regrets his work with AI? He quit Google last year so he could become an outspoken critic of it. And he says the reason he's against it is because it's used for misinformation. That's another word for deception. Satan will come with all deception supernaturally, and AI thinks 100,000 times faster than us with millions of AI computers around the world. It is built for deception. And I said last year when AI was introduced, I believe that AI is introducing the arrival of the Antichrist. Again, signs of the very end times. Let me talk about Israel. The unfolding Gog-Magog war. This is another reason I believe that we're living at the very end. You realize, and so in 1948, when Israel became a nation, did you realize Russia was one of the first nations to recognize Israel? The Gog and Magog war, it comes from Ezekiel 38 and 39. It's a prophesied war between Russia, Iran, Turkey, Libya, the Sudan, and it says many nations with you, all of the proxies with them. Okay, in 1948, Russia was one of the first countries to recognize Israel. Did you know that Turkey was the first Muslim nation to recognize Israel when they became a nation? Iran was the second Muslim nation to recognize Israel. And they had very good relations for many, many years. In 1979, the Shah of Iran fell, and Ayatollah Khomeini became the supreme leader of Iran. And of course, they turned against Israel at that point. Israel had a great relationship with Turkey until about 10 years ago. Erdogan became president. He became more rabidly Muslim. But since 2007, he said, I'm going to declare war on Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu is Hitler, and he's threatened to invade Israel militarily, and he's called on a coalition of Muslim nations to come against Israel. That's called Gog and Magog. And of course, Russia was friendly until a couple of years ago. But when Russia invaded the Ukraine, Israel sided with Zelensky in the Ukraine and Russia turned against them. And so the Gog and Magog war that couldn't have happened in 1948, couldn't have happened in 1968, couldn't have happened in the year 2000, it can happen today. All these nations now are furious at Israel. They're all aligned. You can see it in the news every single day. And now we're seeing Israel preparing to bomb Iran. And I'm just telling you this. In Ezekiel 38, where it talks about these nations that are going to invade Israel, God says this: I'm going to put hooks in your jaw, and I'm going to drag you down to the mountains of Israel. In other words, I'm going to provoke you. Russia has warned Israel and the United States many times, if you bomb Iran, we're going to come after you. The bombing of Iran that's going to happen any day now, it's going to be substantial. It is going to bring Iran to their knees, I believe, financially. Israel can't just strike them a little bit. They have to strike them very hard, and they will. When this happens, it could provoke the Gog and Magog war. I'm not saying it will, but I'm saying this is a very serious time in human history. How many times this year have you heard the phrase World War III? It's been used constantly because this could provoke a worldwide war. Here's number 6 reason I believe that we could be at the very, very end, or that we are. Worldwide pressure for a two-state solution that will never happen. There's the Biden-Harris administration is pressuring Israel to divide the land and to enter into a two-state solution. Israel in 1949, when the first two-state solution was offered by the United Nations and they partitioned Palestine, Israel said yes. The Arabs said no. And on May 14th of 1948, when Israel declared their independence, the next day they were invaded by Egypt, Transjordan, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. And they fought their war for independence, and miraculously, Israel won that war. And since then, Israel's constantly said yes to a two-state solution. The Arabs, the Palestinians have said no until October 7th. And after Hamas invaded Israel last year, Benjamin Netanyahu and the Jewish people say, never again. We're never making a deal with you people again. You're our enemies. You want to kill us. There's no difference between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority or Fatah. All of you want the same thing. It's just a different way that you want to do it. And so the world is saying two-state solution. United Nations, European Union, United States, we're trying to pressure them into a two-state solution. And here's Zechariah 12. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of drunkenness to all the surrounding people when they lay siege against Judah and Jerusalem, and in it shall happen in that day that I will make Jerusalem a very heavy stone for all peoples. All who would try to heave it away will surely be cut into pieces, though all the nations of the earth are gathered against it. Jerusalem is ground zero. When President Biden went there several years ago, he would not let any Jewish people go to East Jerusalem with him because President Biden and Kamala Harris, they do not recognize Israel's right to East Jerusalem or Judea and Samaria, what people call the West Bank. And so they're going to try to get them to divide this, and the Jews won't. This is what this is saying right here. The world is going to march against the Jewish people to try to force them to give up Jerusalem because they will not give it up otherwise. Joseph Borrell, who's the chief diplomat of the European Union, last year said we have to militarily impose a two-state solution on Israel. Well, that's Armageddon. That's what the Bible says. That's what this is saying right here. And so they're not going to give up East Jerusalem. They're not going to give up the West Bank. They're not going to enter into a two-state solution. By the way, the Palestinians don't want a two-state solution. They want a one-state solution. From the river to the sea, they want to kill all the Jews and get rid of them. That's what they want. The majority of Palestinians, these are not nice people who love Israel and just want to get along. They want to destroy the Jewish people from that nation. Number 7, worldwide hatred of the Jews in Israel is never seen before in the history of the world. October 7th opened a satanic portal that whatever anti-Semitism existed before then, which was bad, it's off the charts today. And Jesus prophesied this. This is Matthew 24. As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately saying, tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming or of the end of the age? And Jesus answered and said to them, take heed that no one deceives you. Many will come in my name saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many, and you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of sorrows or birth pangs. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And he was talking to a group of Jewish men. And so Jesus said, at the very end, when the very end comes, wars, look at the wars and rumors of wars going on right now, famines, earthquakes, pestilences. Look at all the things that Jesus prophesied happening right now. He says these are the beginning of birth pangs, but then they're going to deliver you up to tribulation, October 7th, and you're going to be hated by all nations for my name's sake. Since October 7th of last year, there have been tens of thousands of anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian protests all over the world, on college campuses across America. And you see this hatred of the Jewish people in many nations in the Middle East. Of course, Iran is vowed to their destruction. Hamas, Hezbollah, all those. They're fighting a seven-front war with people who want to annihilate them, and this is a war for their independence all over again. It's an existential war. In Iran, there are credible reports that Iran already has enough nuclear material to build a missile, and if they do, they'll shoot it at Israel. They have a hypersonic missile that can reach Israel in 400 seconds. Israel needs our help. They need our prayers. I hope you pray for them every day.